You're incredibly intelligent. We've had amazing conversations. We have different biases in life. Like, absolutely. Yeah, I don't want people to look at this debate and be like, oh my God, like, one guy's a genius, one guy's an idiot. If somebody has that conclusion from this debate, you're an idiot, right? But
Yeah, I think we can let them decide who's the genius and who's the
for
idiot.
sure.
That can that be the title? Genius debates idiot, and they just argue
Yeah.
over who too.
I actually,
But yeah,
you sure? Yeah. See what I'm showing. It was this fire right here. It was really big. Essentially, an employee was disgruntled about the amount of money that he was making, and he burned down this entire warehouse. This is the guy. There were like 7 employees working there at that moment, um, and he videotaped himself and posted it online. And I made the claim that this is a bad thing. Um, and you reached out to me on TikTok. We had previously debated communism or some form of communism, Marxism, more specifically. And we had a very good conversation. You said you disagreed with my stance on this. I would like to hear your stance and what you disagree with.
I do think it's a bit hasty of a position to make to completely neglect any beyond surface level dive into the material conditions that led him to do what he did. And I think to condemn such an action is to condemn the actions that lead to real change in our world. What are your thoughts there?
So, my first thought is I do at some points see, like, I would condemn violence to overthrow things that you see are wrong. I would agree with that. I don't think that the thing that he is fighting against is worth the violence that he caused. First of all, I believe reports came out where he was making nearly $30 an hour. That is $60,000 a year. That is a very good wage. In America, jobs are not like we have a 96% employment rate, right? We are at a point where we are starting to automate jobs like this, and companies have no problem automating that job. They're going to pay you what is cheaper than automating it. And if they need to pay you more, they would rather just get rid of that job. So I'm slightly defending the company in the form of at least they have human beings working there with a very good wage for a warehouse job rather than just automating it altogether. So I don't think that burning that facility down is a fair form of protest because, frankly, I don't think that that job should be paid more, in my opinion.
Okay. So I'd agree in this land of capitalism. I would actually agree there. I think the owner of this warehouse is probably one of the better capitalists, if we want to use some label like that. Yeah, probably treating his workers a lot better than he's able to get away with, if we would like to put it that way. However, you said something right at the end there about fair protest. I don't think there really is such a thing. I think it's really hard to try to be fair to a protester because a protest and riots and actions of violence as such are, in the words of MLK, a language of the unheard. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot possibly be fair or try to treat these actions with any kind of justice. The point is that they're a retaliation against any kind of
Right.
perceived injustice.
Which I won't totally disagree with. But I don't think that burning this warehouse. Oh, we would probably agree on a lot when it comes to how to tax the rich. But I don't think that burning this warehouse down is a fair way to protest against these people.
What does that mean fair? I agree that it's not effective, but what do you mean fair?
Um, Celebrating the burning of millions of dollars of product that other people put time into, all that's going to do is, first of all, this company is going to rebuild this warehouse and it's going to get rid of all the jobs that you were working before. So you just screwed over all your other employees. Other companies are going to see this and especially see the celebration of it and do the same thing. They're going to be like, you know what, screw warehouse workers. We're going to get more robots. So you just got rid of basically the existence of this job altogether. You sped up that process. Two, you didn't hurt the company at all. The company has a massive insurance policy on that warehouse, and I guarantee you, every higher up at this company, at Kimberly Clark, just got a bonus because this thing burnt down. Like, pretty much guaranteed. I've seen that happen time and time again in even just the internships and jobs that I've worked.
Yeah, so I agree completely that it's ineffective. I don't think this guy accomplished his goal. If you were to isolate him in a room, he did not accomplish his goal.
I'm more trying to target what core belief of the world we have different, where you think it's okay to celebrate things like this and I don't, you know, and I can't quite put my finger on it. And once we find that, we can discuss that topic. And that's why I'm trying to like bounce around a lot into different angles of this fire to see what it is that you defend that I don't, and I'm struggling to find that.
I can talk a little bit about something that might impact that belief
Okay.
of mine. So I think almost definitionally, when most capitalists run businesses, they do it out of a dynamic of hate. They want more for themselves and less for those who work for them. If I want more for myself and a hell of a lot less for you, and I'm willing to, um, you know, give myself more luxuries so that you don't possess, you know, the basic requirements of living. I think this is where we're getting pretty close to hate here. His no doubt, the bosses of most of these warehouse workers hate them. Hate them. They would pay them a hell of a lot less, so they could have a hell of a lot more for themselves. So I think when this guy made the realization that all of his bosses and supervisors and capitalists behind the scenes hate him, he, you know, felt an emotional need to retaliate.
Yeah, I will say I have seen a lot of times in lower level management where people will absolutely treat workers like shit. 100%. That absolutely exists. I wouldn't say it is more common than it is not, but I would say it's probably like 30% of the time, which is a ridiculously high amount. I will push back a little bit. I don't think that business owners always hate the people who are below them. In fact, a lot of times business owners want to pay their employees more. The issue is like this is like Dodge v Ford. I don't know how much you know about this, but essentially, I believe it was Ford wanted to pay their employees a lot more. And then Dodge sued them and said, no, you have a right to your shareholders. You can't just pay your employees more because then you're backstabbing your shareholders who gave you the money to do that. And that is why in America and a lot of countries, you have this right to your shareholders and you have to make the most amount of money because you have to defend the people who are taking the risk by investing into your company, right? That was a really influential case. If you take any political compass test, that question will actually be asked, which is, do businesses have only a right to pay their shareholders back? And essentially, what that boils down to is, should businesses do everything they can to defend their employees, or do they have to do everything they can to make a buck for the shareholder? And I'm curious on your perspective on that, actually.
Okay. So oh my god, my allergies are terrible right now. My bad.
All good.
Um, so I think a business has a right to create more goodness in the community in general. In general. So if part of this means supporting the investors, I guess why not? But you could argue you're creating a lot more good for a lot more people if you raise the wages of the employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right. I would
the
agree.
question doesn't really, it really makes sense because I'm sort of answering this in a capitalist framework. If I really went in on this, I'd say the goal of a company is to be you know, democratic, worker run. This is why I'm so big on
Mm-hmm.
worker cooperatives. But that wouldn't really answer your question, which is why it's hard to do so.
Yeah, I think something that I was kind of trying to push this into is something that we're both kind of against is companies constantly jumping into a corporation. Because the moment that a company becomes a corporation, their sole goal is to make as much money as possible and pay people less because they have to pay their shareholders back, which I think is fair in a corporation. Because as a shareholder, what you're doing is you're taking risk by putting money into this company. And if that company isn't doing everything they can to make a return for you, you will not invest into that company, and all of New York completely falls apart. Everything that New York has built in the stock market ceases to exist because people are no longer have faith in investing, which is why corporations have to do everything they can to pay people exactly what they're worth by a capital society, which I would defend for this reason. Because if they don't do exactly that, by pay you exactly what you are worth compared to your replacement, which is a robot, then all of capitalism ceases to exist, which I think is very valuable. So I think where we would agree is that corporations are evil. The
Yeah.
existence of corporations inherently is evil. I still think that corporations should exist, but I think that America should incentivize against corporations. And I think the thing
Well,
that you appreciate about this protest is the fact that it is showcasing corporations are evil, is kind of the conclusion I've drawn here.
yes, my mind is very geared toward, damn the man, no matter what. But I'd say that. So what you said just there,
I will
I
say I don't
agree.
know that saying "damn the man."
Damn the man, damn the empire, the
Okay,
institution.
gotcha.
I suppose. Sorry. Um, so I agree that is fair under a capitalist framework, assuming investors have taken on some amount of risk. Of course, there's a responsibility to pay back those investors. I would rather that a company take no outside investments
Hmm.
and simply honor the investment of time, resources, and labor of their employees and try to redeliver on those assets as much as they can. So
Absolutely
I don't
agree.
really like I don't really like an investor intervention because then it shifts the focus away uh, of number one providing the best product and number two providing the best life for the employees as possible.
I absolutely
That's what
agree.
companies should be geared toward, making the best product and having the happiest employees.
I absolutely agree. I would defend the corporation here because they have no choice but to pay back their shareholder. And you would defend his right to attack the corporation because he feels he needs to live a livable wage. My argument for why I would defend the corporation is because when you live in America and you are taking a job like this, right? I know that this was a 15-minute, very in depth conversation that requires a lot of research in order to understand as deep as we've talked about this. But when you live in America, what you need to understand is when you're taking a job for a massive corporation like this, they are paying you exactly what you are worth and no more, unless you can prove that you are worth more. And by taking a job like this, it is your job to understand that, and you cannot be mad for the wage that you are worth. And if you want more money, it is your job to work a job that is going to pay you more money because they do exist. Which is why I think that defending this is wild because there are jobs that exist that can pay more. And he made the mistake of submitting to working this evil corporation job where they're going to pay him exactly what he's worth.
So, firstly, there are not high-paying jobs out there for everybody.
I would
So,
disagree.
for
I would
everybody.
disagree. In every single major city, there are massive factories that have operator jobs and things like that that are paying unbelievable wages. Unbelievable. If you want to be an inspector, so I work with inspectors a lot. I'm an engineer. Inspectors, anytime something is welded, you need to inspect the weld to make sure that it was done properly. You also need to inspect like things like piping and factory machines to make sure that they're not going to break. This is a very, very common job in any factory or any like manufacturing facility. The requirements of becoming an inspector are: can you pass a drug test and do you have a pulse? That is it. You walk into a building that is hiring inspectors. If you can do both of those things, or honestly just one of those two things, you'll probably get a job. And inspectors make ridiculously good wages, unbelievably. Like right off the bat, you'll be making probably $20 an hour. A year later, you could be making $44 an hour. And if you're working turnarounds, you're making 100K a year in a year.
Okay. So, you know what? Sure. You know what? Sure. I'm being slightly hasty and actually a little bit unfair. Um, yes. Let's say if we're talking major cities or people who are able to relocate, for any person that is healthy, yes, they can probably get a decent job.
So now, if we're
Now,
talking suburbs, I would make the same argument for things like plumber and things like
right,
that.
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a little bit funnier when you get to redneck areas, but the second thing I wanted to say earlier is you made a really good point. Karl Marx is smiling down, or maybe he's smiling up at us. I don't know where he is right now, but Karl Marx is smiling at you right now. You have just discovered Marxism. You've discovered Marx's theory of contradictions adopted by Hegel, or adopted from Hegel. So what you said was the worker must work for some wage, but he can't have the highest wage possible. He only can work for what he's worth because there's a corporation above him that needs to pay out to shareholders, and they really can only afford to pay him what he's worth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you can think of these are called contradictions in Marxism. They don't
Right.
mean the same thing as contradiction colloquially, but you can think of them as tensions. There is a tension between what the employee wants and what the corporation wants. That's all you've described. That's all you've
Mm-hmm.
described. And when you have, as Hegel called them, when you have a thesis and an antithesis, they must form a synthesis. Some amount of change must spring out in society. And this is what revolution is to a Marxist.
So here, one thing I will push back against, as far as a lot of times that we'll talk about Marxism in this debate and the previous one, you will find something that I agree with Marxism and say that you are a Marxist. I wouldn't say that you can do that, because there's a lot of every economic structure where they agree, right? Just because I agree with the reasoning of the problem doesn't mean I agree with the conclusion, right? I
Exactly. Yeah.
do
You're not
agree.
entirely a
I
Marxist.
do
Yeah.
agree with Karl Marx's reasoning that for the problems of capitalism, I do not agree with his solution, which is what I would say truly is Marxism, which is why I really want to like put the hard cut. I'm definitely not a Marxist, right? Same thing.
Yeah. Fair.
A really good example was somebody, I can't remember who, was talking about like Andrew Tate, for example. And he's like, the thing that people like, the reason so many young men like Andrew Tate is because he's really good at describing the problem, and then he just fucks it up with the conclusion entirely, right? Which is, oh, women fucking suck. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
And people would prescribe to Andrew Tate because he was really good at saying, this is the problem with society. Look at this. Look at this. Women shouldn't be pilots. You know what I mean? And he ruins it with that last
Yeah.
part. So, like, I agree. Like, I absolutely have the ability to find the same, like, start of Marxism and agree with the problems that they're describing, but I do disagree with the conclusion. Just to make that very much clear that I'm not a Marxist.
We haven't converted back some today.
I don't think you
But
will.
yeah,
We've agreed a lot here on the problem that this guy is facing. I would still 100% argue that burning this facility down was wrong, which I think you also agree. But I more so would argue that supporting it is also wrong, because this is not the right way to argue against the evil corporation. And that, I still believe, is our disagreement. Would you agree that you disagree with that?
yes. So the okay, all I really am advocating for here is a more in-depth explanation for what the guy did, to try to go a little bit beyond the surface level. I'm not arguing effectiveness. I agree it was
Mm-hmm.
not
Right.
great, and I wouldn't even support it because it was pretty ineffective. That's not the way that you try to start a revolution. But why did he try to start a revolution? I just happen to think that this is the only real way that we'll get societal change, especially in a place like the U.S. Radical, transformative, violent actions, in some cases, need to take place for any change to occur. The voting system sucks. Ranked choice voting would make it a little bit better,
A lot bit.
but I don't think that we'd be able to completely vote out oppression and change a society and win back the world if we're just concerned with being extremely peaceful and delicate and absolutely morally justified in everything that we do. If I will always support an advocacy for an oppressed people.
It's going to be harder for you than for other people. And I would love for a society where everything is completely fair. But just because the society is not completely fair, which is a very difficult ending point to get to, doesn't mean that burning a building down is the right route to get there.
I agree. For
Awesome.
slightly different reasons, I agree. I think I'd be going in circles if I had to restate why.
Awesome. Yeah. Perfect. I think that this is a fair middle ground.